Welcome to Design Notes, the show in which we find out how the games you love get onto your table, with me, Ben Maddox. Today, I'm talking to the designer of Snowdonia and Guilds of London, Tony Boydell. We talk about the joy of being an amateur and embarking on a new phase of your designing career. If you have anything you want to say, please leave a comment in the comments section below. I hope you enjoy the show. I'd like to welcome to the show the doyen, the shining star, the vanguard of British game design, Tony Boydell. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Let's just not let Martin Wallace know about this particular podcast, shall we?
He's Australian now, so he doesn't count. So my first question is what I ask everybody, and please don't feel shy to blow your own trumpet, as it were. So when did you realise that you were good at what you do?
Well, I think there comes a point to get into sort of game design anyway, to have some level of confidence in your own abilities before you start. Otherwise, how could you possibly want to approach anybody with any idea? I mean, I solved the problem a little bit by starting my own board games company, which saved me on pitching, but it didn't mean I avoided pitching for games through my career to date. So I think that level of confidence was always there. I was quite pleased with my ideas for things. I think it's probably a more recent realization that I'm good at what I do because I've now got the body of work behind me. I mean, you can have the arrogance of this game is great back in the early 2000s, but that you're very, very quickly disavowed of that opinion when you go to a major show and you don't sell 1,000 copies in 5 minutes. You know, you have to be a little bit more sort of down to earth when that happens. And I think it's just you have to experience stuff and you learn a little bit more about yourself as you go along, and therefore you feel more confident, and it feeds back on itself. And I think I'm good at what I do because I have learnt the lessons along the way. I wouldn't say that I was sort of born a board gaming savant. I think I've learnt it. I learnt it the hard way. I've just done it. I've just done it by the graft. I mean, I did martial arts when I was very much younger, and my best pal at the time took to it like a duck to water. I mean, he was really, really good, really quickly, and I always found it quite difficult to remember the katas and so on. But we were drinking with the sensei after hours, so I wasn't that young. But he said that he always thought if we were sticking at it for a long time, I would do better in the long run because I actually worked for it, and therefore the success I got from it would be much more satisfying than somebody who was naturally gifted, who could possibly get very bored very quickly because they weren't finding any kind of challenge. And I think running a games company when I first started and having to do things and learn as we were going along, I think they were all great lessons for refining what a good game design should be. So more focus on playtesting, more focus on artwork and presentation, more focus on just filtering out the dross ideas from the great ideas, you know, actually understanding that having a really funny idea for a game isn't going to make it a successful game, because funniness in games is really difficult to translate. So there are certain areas where I began to avoid and focus more on certain other areas. And for me, I tended to settle on those middleweight Euro games with measurements of, you know, measures of hand management or resource management, worker placement, those kinds of things. And I settled into it very quickly. And I think I'm really good at that because I love playing those games. I have a lot of experience in them as a player. So I think I'm really good at reflecting that back in my designs.
I mean, to what degree, you know, you've been a publisher and a designer, and you've done the whole lot. You've even done illustrations for games. To what degree are games? So I always have this, you know, I'm quite sort of, you know, pretentious and things, and I always sort of say, fundamentally, it's in the mechanics. You can have index cards and a plain paperboard, if the mechanics are good, the game's going to be satisfying. To what degree are games an amalgam of the art and the graphic design and the game ideas and the mechanisms? You know, to what degree do you need all of those things to have something that's good?
Well, I think I sort of agree. I mean, if you look at where we come from as an industry, a lot of the games that were incredibly popular had the most appalling presentation. They had the most appalling sort of lightness of any consideration towards how a thing looks or feels. So you'd have a medieval trading game which was tremendously involving, but the box art would be really slovenly and lazy. But the professionalism of the industry has shown people what can be done. And actually, if you want the games to be more widely accepted, you have to make them look better. They have to be more attractive. I'm doing a series of brainstorming sessions with Alex Lee, the artist who did the work for Luxi Turner, who's doing the art for my Aleph Null game. And it's really important that we wrestle with the game mechanics, but also an understanding of where the game is coming from, what impression it's going to give players, or the player, because it's a solo game, on the table, and how the art is going to communicate both the mechanics of the game, you know, the framework the player has to follow, but also how to make them feel like they're doing what the game is about, which in this example is doing something rather satanic in nature. But it's so important that it's right. If it was simply just index cards with the abilities of the effects written in crayon on them, it just wouldn't have the same. You'd have a feeling of doing something, but you wouldn't feel as much as you could do. I mean, the art and something like the time limit in Luxi Turner induces a measure of stress in the players of the game. And some people find that intolerable and they don't like the game because of that, or they won't play it with the timer because of that. But for me, if board games need to be more than just a Sunday afternoon lying on the carpet pushing tiddlywinks around, they have to be more involving to the players. They have to be more interactive with the players, but they also have to make you feel like you feel at the end of a really good Marvel movie. You know, you feel exhilarated, you feel excited, you feel the adrenaline has flowed. And the idea that board games can't do that, I think, is a mistake. I think they can introduce excitement. I mean, there was a series recently that you did about fun, about board games that make you laugh, that elicit that response. And I think you missed one really important game in that list, and that was Balderdash. I've seen people play Balderdash that have gone so red-faced I feared they were going to have a heart attack because they were laughing so much, because the environment of the game stimulated such a strong group response. And that's hilarity. But I think a board game has the potential to elicit fear, excitement. You know, I mean, look at the Pandemic series, how people have gotten so involved. They feel like movies. At the end of it, people are sort of sitting back in their seats going, wow. And that's not just the mechanisms that have done that. It is the artwork. It is the flavor text. It is the editing of the rules. It is the presentation of everything. The whole thing has to be there. Otherwise, I don't think it can work anymore. We've seen what it can be, and we can't go back.
So let's go back to the beginning then. You know, you've mentioned you owned your own game company, and you've now been publishing games for over 20 years. What is your journey into game design? Were you just one of these enthusiastic gamers who, you know, every gamer has got their grand plans of designing a game? Were you just one of those gamers who actually went through and did it?
I would dispute that. I know quite a lot of gamers who play some really great games, and they're very good at playing games, but they have no interest at all in designing a game. It's not what they want to do. They would rather sit on the other side of that particular table. But I've always been a voracious reader and watcher of TV programs and movies, and I love all that kind of stuff. Playing games introduced a new world of storytelling to me, particularly around the idea of Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. And it was through those that I realized that I could actually take some of my normal creative things that I never had any ideas about gaming with. So I did lots of cartoons. I was always a cartoonist, or I used to write poems and short stories as a young lad. And I saw that the cartoons and the storytelling could find a different outlet in board games. It wasn't just pen and ink now. It was actually chits and money and counters and wooden pieces and boards and that kind of stuff, and cards. And it was really then that when I was shown those particular tools, that suddenly it's almost as if a door had opened in my brain, and my notebook began filling up with ideas, because I now had a language to communicate how to build those ideas.
And so, you know, you had a life before games. Did you, I mean, any of the skills, you know, you're an IT guy. Are any of the skills that you developed and honed and got good at before you were a game designer, did they ever come over into your game design and help you with that process?
I'm not sure if I can think of anything directly. I think when you come from a sort of development, codey IT background, you're quite analytical about things. So a lot of the processes involved in board game decision making, you're quite used to in terms of, you know, the way you write code. You're aware of decision trees. You know, they're kind of, you're aware of this sort of thing going on, and you're sort of manifesting how you. A lot of people wouldn't sort of equate how they think about things in those sorts of terms. But I've always tried to keep them quite separate. So I'm not a big video games player, but I love my board games, and my work and my play, if you like, are kept very distinctly separate. Because I'm not sure there's a great deal of crossover. You know, if there is one crossover, it's because I use PowerPoint in both. You know, I mock up my prototypes using PowerPoint, but I do my work stuff in PowerPoint. I think all of my skills, I mean, I wasn't going to be an IT professional. That wasn't the original idea for my career. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a writer. And I was so terrible at my A-levels that I could only get into further education through the clearing process, which is basically you just stick your hand up at the back of a big room and say, does anybody want me on their course, please? And somebody says, well, I got a space on this IT course in Liverpool if you'd like to come along. And it's like, oh, great, Liverpool's great. I had the Beatles. It's got a good music scene. I'll go along to that. And I settled into IT. I like it a lot. But it's never been anything I've been super passionate about. But when I discovered board games, I discovered that's what I became super passionate about.
So, you know, if anyone knows you, they know that you're not backwards in coming forward, and you are not ashamed to make your feelings on any particular topic at any particular time known. Do you think that game design for you, because, you know, IT wasn't, you know, the thing that you really loved and were really passionate about, do you think that game design over this 20 years has kept you sane? You've been able to exercise those creative muscles that you couldn't do in your job?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I keep notebooks. I've kept notebooks for so long. I mean, they're full of almost half of my work notebooks, if you like, the ones that I would take into meetings. I mean, they're full of doodles, or they're full of little pages of half-finished game ideas. There were a whole series of volumes in my days working for the Home Office back in the early 2000s that have got proto-Snowdonia elements in there, you know, card designs, railway designs, you know, mechanics, turn order stuff. It was never far away. And with lots of train journeys, I was doing a lot of commuting at that time. I had a lot of time to kind of write these things down. It is something, it is my outlet. I mean, I've got a big family as well. And so looking after them, and they're all growing up now. So I turn to board games more, I think, because I don't like vegetating in front of the television. I mean, now if I spend an hour in front of the TV in an evening, I have to get up and go and do something else, because it's almost as my body saying, well, you've done that bit of the day. You need to go and do something else, because that's not ultimately pushing you forward in any way, shape or form.
So I want to talk now about, you know, your game design process, how you get an idea from inside your head to something on a table that I can play and score no points at. What can you give us just a brief overview of your game design process? It's
inspiration first. I tend to get an idea from either a book or a movie or another game that I'm playing, and so something will sort of trigger, and that will go down into a notebook. And then I'll obsess about it for a bit, and then I'll leave it for a bit. It depends how long. I mean, it depends what other things come along. But for instance, Ivor the Engine, the board game, started life as something about saving the animals of the planet, cleaning up the environment, putting them back in their habitats. But that was a design that sort of fell onto the page fully formed in the mid to late 90s. And I didn't look at it again until sort of the late 2000, early 2000s, because I was looking at an Eye of the Engine board game. So these things, it all depends on what's obsessing me at the moment. Lockdown has been really good in the sense that I've got nothing else to go and do. So I can't go and play lots of other people's board games in the evenings because there isn't anybody to play board games with. So a lot of design elements have progressed further than they normally would do in the space of 12 months, simply because I am at home. And when I'm not working, I am doing something with board games, either, curating my proto museum collection, or I'm thinking about something new. And I have all the time and space to do that. But it starts with the idea. And what I tend to do now, which I never used to do, is I'm a little bit slower at actually producing the physical prototype. I find sort of the process of just laying out cards and a board within the virtual world, within the electronic world, PowerPoint or Visio, whatever it might be, is really good at sort of pushing those thought experiments through. So I'll do 10, 15 versions of a game design before it even gets printed out for the first time, because I'm kind of playing it in my head before it gets any further. And there's a lot of stuff in my folder, my Dropbox folder, that has never been printed out because I've taken it so far down the line and thought, this isn't going anywhere. And I might come back to it, and it maybe a different theme will spur it on, take it to the next level. For me, it starts with a subject matter, and I like to wrap mechanisms around the subject.
And so, I've noticed, because you have a daily blog and you blog a lot about your game design process, and I think you put up a picture recently with like a list of all the games you've got currently on the go, and it's tons. And I guess part of that is lockdown has really accelerated that process. But what is the ratio between ideas? Because when I write, I have ideas all the time, and I would say 10% of them get to the page, and then of those, maybe 5% of them get to anywhere near finished. What's that ratio for you when it comes to ideas to actually getting games done?
Well, at the moment, if I took that list of 25 different prototypes, at the moment it's 25 down to 1, because I've only got one confirmed game coming out at some point in the future. I've got several under sort of development / scrutiny with other companies, and that's great. I've got quite a lot that are sort of down the middle of the road now, with down on that journey with co-designers and other forms of development, and I've got an awful lot that are right at the very, very start, and I'm kind of itching just to get them played by people. And I pity it's going to be such a weird thing, us all going back to pubs and clubs, because we're all going to turn up with our acquisitions bags, and they're going to be huge. And I'm going to have another bag full of all my prototypes as well. So the Ross and Y Club is going to be pretty well going to be fighting over who's going to play what and when at the moment. So there's no guarantee any of these proto designs are going to get out and played within the forthcoming 12 months, let alone the last 12 months. So I think at the moment, when I had a games company, it was quite good. I had a better ratio of publishing, because obviously I could sort of stamp my little feet and say, we're going to do my game next, thank you very much. Right. But it's quite nice to relax a bit. I mean, I was never worried about how many things were published by myself, because I don't stake my entire mortgage payment system on board games published and the royalties accrued. I enjoy the process, and I enjoy the results of it, but it's I was always more worried about not having anything in the bank, if you like, that the well would run dry at some point and I'd have nothing to turn to. And if somebody said to me, Tony, what have you got that we could potentially look at? I would go, well, I haven't got anything. The cupboard is bare. But that's not true. I've got so many things that are sort of tickling along at various stages. And occasionally one will pop up to the front again, and I'll get really excited about it, and I'll give it a whole bunch of work, and then it'll just sort of dip back into the sort of the background and quietly develop of its own accord.
So this is interesting, because we have seen I sort of really got into gaming in around 2012, And I have seen, even in that 9 years, I've seen a rapid acceleration in not just professionalism in terms of quality of components and all of that, but in terms of just people whose professions are in the game industry in whatever capacity now. You know, when I got into it in 2012, you could, apart from the sort of German contingent, you could kind of count on your own, on one hand, the amount of designers who did it full time as a job. And you've always struck me as someone, one of these kind of, and I mean, I don't mean this in a negative way, of course, you know, the kind of person who sits in your garage and comes up with stuff, and it's never been about being a job for you. Firstly, is that true? And secondly, if so, why? Why have you never wanted to step over into the world of being a professional designer?
Well, it is true. Absolutely, it's true. And I wear that badge with pride, actually, because I fear that if I made it my career, my formal bread-winning, food on the table, water in the tap career, that it would lose all of the joy that it gives me, because the pressure of delivering would just become too much. I mean, if I couldn't sell a game design every 3 months, then that would be terrible. It would be disheartening, and it could be difficult financially. And you know, I just don't want any of that. I don't want it to spoil anything about this industry. I mean, I love board games. I love everything about them. And oddly, I enjoyed the level I've gotten to. But I don't want to put any more pressure on myself, because I think it would just take away that spark within me that makes it joyful. I think I'm very proud that for a lot of people, what I do is evident in my games, that they understand where I'm coming from, that I put hidden jokes. So the theme is really carefully thought out. You know, the weather in Snowdonia, people berate me for that, but actually, you know, go and spend 6 months in Wales. It's exactly like that, you know. And it's important to have authenticity. It just, for me, it is about that process. Lux Eterna, most recently, the idea that I want my solo player to feel some measure of stress, because it's a game about your ship blowing apart and you're falling into a black hole. It should absolutely be a stressful game. It shouldn't be something you just sit there and chew over with a donut and a cup of coffee on a Saturday morning. It should be something that really, really motivates you. It should get a response. So I think when people play my games, I've been very careful that they see a little bit of me, that I'm not somebody who only ever produces, you know, tile laying games or hand management games or tessellating games of any kind. That a Tony game is mostly what you know already, but there's a little bit of Tony in it, you know, and that it stands out because of that.
And so, you know, you've had Snowdonia, Ivor the Engine, Guilds of London, very much grounded in a British identity. How important is it for you that you're thought of as a British designer? Is that a thing, or is it not important? Is it just that you just happen to fall on these topics?
I just happen to fall on the topics. I've fallen on these topics because British history is rich, absolutely soaking with intrigue and adventure and controversy and tragedy and drama. It is a wonderful source for any art form to draw inspiration from. But I don't identify as British. I identify as European. And that's because, not of any political leanings, but because all my gaming experience has been in the context of Europe. I've learned the most and had the most experience in my game design and game playing career because of Essen Spiel, because of Lariacon, because of all of those things, all the games that have come out in Germany and France and Spain in the last 25 years. Those are the things that have really informed me as a gamer and a game designer. And I think of myself as European because of that. The fact that I have British history to take great source from is great for me. Fantastic. You know, that's a good thing. But no, I'm very much, I don't wear that particular jingoistic badge.
And so, you mentioned you were co-owner of Surprise Stare for 20 years. And so whenever you had a design, you could put it through your company and get it designed. It's very useful, right? But how has your thoughts on getting your stuff published changed since you no longer have your own board game company?
Well, it's going to be a bit more work for me. I'm going to have to do a little bit more footwork, I think, a little bit more legwork around the conventions. But it doesn't worry me too much. I mean, I've been so lucky, so fortunate that I've met, because I've worked with a board games company, I've been able to work with other board games companies over the last 10 years in particular. Surprise Stare was very, very insular for the first 10 years. We were very cautious about how we approached things, and we wanted to spread out a little bit more, but it was so difficult and we didn't want to take any gambles. We were always very level-headed about that. And when Snowdonia came along, it really opened up so many doors for all of us. So I never really pushed it while we were with Surprise Stare, and I don't really want to push it now. I mean, I'm lucky enough now to have people in my address book, if you like, that lots of other game designers don't. And I'm really conscious that I don't abuse that privilege. But I have to recognize that I do have, I am a couple of steps up the stairway than a lot of folks would like to be. So I am very fortunate in that way, but I don't take it for granted. It doesn't change my quality control. It doesn't change my approach. I don't really see it changing very much because Surprise Stare has been branching out anyway in the last 10 years. And I've been doing a lot more on my own for other people, as has Alan. From his side, he's done a lot more wargamey stuff, which he's excellent at, which I'm not very good at all. So we've naturally both enjoyed the space that the experience of 20 years now of Surprise Stare has given us to be able to talk to other people, if you like, to see other people, if you like, in this sort of board game industry relationship. So I don't think it's changed me much. I'm perhaps a little bit more nervous, but then I'm not paying my mortgage off the board games. It doesn't matter, ultimately it doesn't matter.
So on that topic then, what have you got coming in the future? What can we get on the table that is a Tony Boydell design in the future?
Well, the main one is Aleph Null, which is my solo game about summoning a major demon of the hierarchy from hell. And it's a game that you can win and then lose. So just winning the game doesn't mean you've actually won the game, because you could lose right at the very last minute. And it's a deck deconstruction game in the manner of something like Fish Farewell Forever, the wonderful solo game from Japan, which I don't think many people have been able to get access to, but it is superb. It's a game about destroying the deck. The deck disappears. The more efficiently you can do that, the better you will do. And this game is the same. You have all the tools and implements of the ritual of summoning this demon, but there must be nothing left when the demon arrives. He's quite prissy about how everything is when he turns up finally. So you've got to be very careful. And it's a game of combinations of opportunism occasionally, and get people who like games like those more involved card games like Netrunner or the TCGs, particularly in Magic the Gathering, will find a lot in it because they will recognize how the interplay between cards can be used. So there's that. And so that's a solo game. A group of folks are looking at my attentional shipping game at the moment, which has been through a lot of development with myself. And I know you played it with me at Larrycon a couple of years ago now. And that has come over leaps and bounds now. So I have great hopes for that. So but there's no sort of confirmation of that. Luxa Turner, which I've mentioned a couple of times, that's getting a second printing now with Capstone Games in the States. It's a game that's been totally unavailable in the States unless you manage to buy boxes of it from me. So that's going to get a bigger release in the US, which I'm really, really thrilled about. And I've been doing a couple of little bits and pieces for Kickstarter campaigns. So I did some Grand Austria Hotel cards, some guests for that, which I love doing guest appearances just because it just makes me so happy to be involved in other people's brilliant stuff, and I do like Grand Austria Hotel. So to be involved even in a slight bit, is delightful. And I've done a couple of other things, but I can't talk about them right now. But by the time this comes out, you probably would have heard about it anyway. But there's a couple of other projects that I'm working on as well. But they're just sort of guest appearances. But, you know, I just keep plugging away at the other stuff, keep sort of pitching ideas and hopefully other things will come out. But I think until I can get some decent playtesting done, I'm not happy to show most of the stuff to folks yet, because it may look nice in front of me and it may play nicely in my thought experiment, but I really need to see people's faces to see whether they're actually having fun.
So I've got 2 more questions. First question is, conventions are back on, you're at Essen and you're going for a couple of beers after the show, and you're coming back from the loo and you hear a table of gamers and they're talking about you. They're talking about your work. So you sidle into the corner and you eavesdrop. What do you hope they're saying about your stuff?
I would hope that they say that my stuff is always worth a look. That in the 7 or 8 halls of Essen Spiel, with 1,500 new games coming out, that they would always want to stop by, whichever stand I happen to be lurking on, that they would stop by and see what I was doing, because it was always worth having a look. It may not be something they like. It might be this year this is a family game that they have no interest in, or a solo game and not interested in solo games. But at least going along and seeing what Tony's doing is of interest to them. And I think that's the best that we can all as designers hope for in these days, because there are so many of us out there now, and how we get ourselves even to anybody's attention is so difficult. So yes, I'd love them to be saying, oh, have you seen what Tony's doing? It's not my cup of tea, but do you know what? It's another Tony game, you know.
And so my last question is then, why is gaming good?
Because it has the potential to bring so many different types of people together. And it doesn't matter who you are, what you believe in, all sat around a gaming table playing Balderdash or Tapestry or Gloomhaven or Pandemic Year Zero. You can share something, just like being in a cinema, all enjoying the movie. I mean, if you were able to switch the lights on in a cinema halfway through the Marvel movie and look around, you wouldn't see just one demographic of person in that cinema. You would see, I think you'd be very surprised at the people who go and see those films. And it's the same with board games, that I think that they offer a channel for folks who wouldn't necessarily even be aware of each other to get together and enjoy something and find something that they have in common. I think that's where I find board games.
Brilliant. Well, Tony, thank you ever so much for giving over your time.
Thank you, Ben.